My wife secretly borrowed $250, $0 from her boss to buy a house, then faked her death and disappeared with the money. Now my ex-husband is suing me for half, claiming he's entitled to the property we never even owned. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, writing about how my wife, Lisa, turned out to be the biggest liar and cheat I've ever met. The craziest part. It all unraveled so fast, like one of those movies where everything's fine until suddenly the floor drops out. One day I was just your normal guy working my ass off trying to build a life with her. We had a decent marriage, nothing spectacular but enough to keep us comfortable. I thought she was loyal, honest, maybe a little bitchy sometimes, but that was just Lisa being Lisa. But then I started noticing little things. She'd come home later than usual, say she was working late, but the hours didn't add up. Her phone was always hidden, and when I asked about it, she'd brush me off with some snide remark about trust. She'd start going out with her friends more often, leaving me alone, and I caught her lying about where she was going. She'd say she was at a spa or a dinner with her boss, but I could tell she was hiding something. The real shocker came when I found her phone one night. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I just left it on the table and saw a message pop up. It was from a guy named Mark, and the message said, "Can't wait to see you tonight, miss you already." That hit me like a punch in the gut. I looked closer and found a string of texts that made it clear Lisa was cheating on me, not just with Mark but with someone else too. I felt sick. All those years I thought we were solid. Turns out I was just another fool in her game. I started digging deeper, going through her social media, her emails. I found photos of her and Mark at fancy restaurants, private getaways, even a few steamy texts. But what really threw me was the financial stuff. She'd been secretly borrowing money, huge sums, from her boss, a guy named Charles. She told me she needed the cash for some home renovations, but I found bank statements showing she borrowed over $250. That's when I realized she was planning something bigger. I don't know exactly what, but it was clear she was hiding a lot. One night I confronted her. I was furious, hurt, betrayed. I told her I knew everything, that I had the evidence. She looked me straight in the eye and laughed, that cold, bitchy laugh she always had when she was trying to brush something off. She said I was overreacting, that Mark was just a fling, that the money was for a dream investment, and that I was paranoid. She even had the nerve to say I was imagining things, that I was losing my mind. But I knew better. I knew she was lying about everything, including the fact that she'd been planning her escape for months. The emotional fallout hit me hard. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I was angry at her, yes, but also devastated. How could I have been so blind? I loved her, or at least I thought I did. Now I saw her for what she really was, a manipulative, selfish woman who was willing to ruin us for her own gain. The betrayal cut deep, and I didn't know how to process it all. I felt numb, like I was watching my life fall apart piece by piece. I wanted to believe she'd come clean, that she'd admit her lies, but she just kept lying, denying, dismissing me like I was insignificant. That night I sat alone in the dark, staring at her phone, the bank statements, the messages. Every piece of evidence pointed to one thing. Lisa was not the woman I thought I married. She was a con artist, a liar, a cheat. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I just knew I couldn't keep living in this illusion anymore. The next day, I decided I'd get to the bottom of her plans, find out exactly how deep she'd gone, and figure out how to protect myself from whatever was coming. Little did I know, her plans went way beyond just cheating. She was involved in something much darker, and I was about to get caught in the middle of it all. The morning after I found everything out, I felt like I was walking around in a fog. My mind kept racing, trying to process what I'd learned. Lisa's lies, her cheating, the money she borrowed, everything suddenly felt so surreal. I couldn't believe I'd been blind for so long, ignoring all the signs, making excuses for her. Now, with all this evidence in my hands, I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't just sit around and let her slip away, especially not with the kind of money involved. That's when I started digging into her bank accounts, her phone logs, anything I could find that might give me more insight into her plans. I remembered seeing her on her phone late at night, texting someone, probably Mark or maybe Charles. I decided to trace those messages, find out who she'd been talking to and what she'd been planning. Turns out, she'd been in contact with Charles, her boss, for months. I found emails where she was asking for more money, claiming she needed it for urgent family issues. But the truth was she was using it to fund her secret house purchase. I also uncovered that Charles had loaned her the money, but he was getting impatient. He wanted his money back, and Lisa kept promising she'd pay him, but she hadn't. What truly shocked me was when I found out she faked her own death to get rid of any suspicion. Yeah, she had plans to disappear with the money, leave everything behind and start fresh somewhere else. She'd even gone so far as to buy a fake death certificate and set up a new identity for herself. I couldn't believe she'd go that far. She was willing to leave me, her life, everything behind just to escape her lies. I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak. How could someone do this? How could she lie so effortlessly, so coldly? I knew I had to do something about her disappearing act. I started reaching out to her friends, her family, anyone I thought might have seen her or known where she was going. I even hired a private investigator to track her down. The more I learned, the more I realized she was planning her escape for real. She'd even been talking about starting a new life, maybe in another country, with the money she borrowed from Charles. I felt so betrayed, not just as her husband, but as a man who thought he knew his wife. I kept asking myself, how could she do this? How could she lie, cheat, steal, then fake her own death all in one go? Meanwhile, I kept going through her emails and messages. I found a series of texts where she was negotiating with Charles, promising she'd pay him back in full once she'd sold the house she bought with his money. But she was also making plans to leave town, to cut all ties. I discovered she'd already rented a new apartment under a fake name, had money wired to her in secret, and was preparing her exit. It was like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. She was a master manipulator, convincing everyone she was the victim, that her actions were justified because she needed a fresh start. I remember feeling numb when I saw the evidence of her fake death. It was the ultimate betrayal, a betrayal so cold and calculated that I couldn't believe I'd been blind to it all along. I started questioning everything: our marriage, my judgment, even my own sanity. How did I not see this coming? How did I miss all the signs? I felt angry at myself for trusting her, for loving her so blindly. But mostly I felt furious. Furious at her for lying, for hurting me, for stealing my life and my future. In the end, I realized that I had to do something to stop her. I couldn't let her get away with this scam, this con. I reached out to the authorities, gave them all the evidence I had, and started preparing for a fight. I knew she was dangerous, especially if she thought she could just walk away from everything, including me. I wasn't going to let her destroy what little was left of our life without a fight. But deep down, I also knew that this was just the beginning. She crossed a line I never thought anyone could cross, and now I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces and move forward, even if that meant losing her forever. After I turned everything over to the police, things moved surprisingly fast. The evidence I provided was enough to start an investigation into her financial dealings and her disappearance. I was determined to find out where she'd gone, what she was planning, and more importantly, how she could do something so cold-blooded. While the authorities worked on tracking her down, I felt this strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because I finally had proof of her lies, but dread because I knew she'd fight to the last to protect her new life. In the meantime, I started going through my own options. I spoke with a lawyer about the property we never even owned, how she'd manipulated the paperwork and faked her death to claim the house, which she then disappeared with. It was a mess, but the lawyer assured me that legally I wasn't liable for her actions. Still, the emotional toll was heavy. I kept replaying everything in my head: the nights she lied about her whereabouts, the secret calls, the money she borrowed, and the fake death. It was like a punch to the gut every time I thought about how she'd planned her escape for months, maybe even years. One night, I received an unexpected call from her. I didn't answer at first, but curiosity got the better of me. When I finally did, her voice was cold, calm, almost mocking. She told me she was safe, that she'd left town to start fresh, and that she didn't owe me anything. anymore. She denied everything, of course, said she was innocent, that I was just jealous or paranoid. But I knew better. I knew she was hiding somewhere, probably living off the money she'd stolen, maybe even laughing at how easily she'd pulled the wool over my eyes. Her words only fueled my anger. I realized she was playing a game, trying to manipulate me from afar, to make me doubt myself, to make me think I was crazy. But I wasn't going to let her do that. I had enough evidence, enough proof to show she was lying. I was determined to bring her back, to hold her accountable for everything she'd done. But I also knew this wasn't just about money or property anymore. It was about trust, betrayal, and the fact that she'd willingly destroyed what we had. As days went by, I started noticing more signs that she was close. Her bank accounts were being drained, and her new address was in a city hundreds of miles away. I hired a private investigator to keep tabs on her, and they confirmed she was living under a different name, working a low-paying job just to stay under the radar. Every time I saw her face in the photos, I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak. How could she do this to me? How could she betray everything we built, our home, our life, our future, just to run away with her lies and greed? Meanwhile, the legal battle over the property was heating up. The bank and the courts started questioning the ownership of the house, the fake documents, and her fake death certificate. I was told that I might have to fight in court just to prove I was the rightful owner of the property, even though we never technically owned it. It was a strange twist. She'd stolen the house, faked her death to cover her tracks, and now I was fighting to get my name cleared and the property back. I felt like I was caught in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, with no clear end in sight. But what really hit me hard was realizing how much she'd lied about her motives. She'd always been the bitchy, manipulative type, but I never thought she'd go this far. Faking her death, stealing money, leaving me to pick up the pieces. It was beyond anything I could have. Imagine, I kept asking myself, how did I not see it coming? How did I let her lie to me for so long? The betrayal cut so deep I felt like I was bleeding inside. I was angry at her, furious at myself, and just exhausted from the emotional roller coaster. At some point, I decided I had to get out of this mess emotionally. I started seeing a counselor, trying to process everything. I told myself I deserved better, that I needed to let go of the anger and the heartbreak. But the truth was, I was still furious. Furious that she'd used me, that she'd manipulated everyone around her, that she'd risked everything for greed and lies. I knew I'd never forget what she did, but I also knew I had to move on for my own sanity. I kept telling myself that justice would catch up with her eventually, that someday she'd be held accountable for her actions. And until then, I'd keep fighting to get my life back, no matter how long it took. Because at the end of the day, I realized the biggest lesson was how someone can hide their true nature behind a pretty face and a fake smile, and I'd never let myself be blindsided like that again. The weeks that followed felt like a blur. Every day I woke up with a knot in my stomach, knowing she was still out there, somewhere, living a lie. The investigation was moving slowly but steadily. The authorities had tracked her to a small apartment in a city I'd never even been to, and I got updates that she was trying to start fresh, working at a diner under a fake name, trying to stay under the radar. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was laughing at me, thinking she'd pulled off the biggest con of her life. Meanwhile, the legal fight over the house was dragging on. The courts kept asking for more documentation, more proof that I wasn't involved in her scam. I had to hire a private attorney who specialized in fraud and property disputes. It was expensive, but I was determined to clear my name and get my property back. The more I dug into her financial records, the more I realized how deep her lies went. She'd borrowed money from her boss, Charles, promising to pay him back once she sold the house, but she never intended to. She was planning her escape, and the house was just a pawn in her scheme. One night I got a call from the investigator. They managed to get a photo of her at the diner, working behind the counter. She looked exhausted but still managed to look smug. I stared at the picture, feeling a mix of rage and sadness. I wondered how someone could be so cold, so calculating, to fake her own death and leave me hanging. It was like she was playing a game and I was just another pawn she was discarding. I knew I had to find a way to confront her, but I didn't know how or when. Then out of nowhere she called me, just once. Her voice was calm, almost amused. She told me she was living her best life, that she'd moved on from all the drama, and that I should do the same. She denied everything, said she was innocent, that I was just jealous, that I was trying to ruin her. I wanted to scream at her, tell her how much she'd destroyed me, but I held back. I knew that giving her the satisfaction of a reaction wouldn't do any good. Instead, I told her to stay safe, but I knew it was a lie. I wanted her to feel the weight of everything she'd done, even if she never faced the consequences. What hurt the most was realizing how much I'd trusted her. We built a life together, or so I thought. She'd been lying to me the entire time, planning her escape with Charles, with Mark, with anyone she thought could help her. I kept asking myself, how did I not see this? How could I have been so blind? I was angry at her, sure, but I was also angry at myself for not noticing the signs earlier. I've been so caught up in our routine, in the idea that she was loyal, that I missed the fact that she was planning her own version of freedom at my expense. The more I learned, the clearer it became that her plan was meticulous. She faked her death with the help of a friend, bought a new identity, and was already living somewhere else. The fake death certificate was convincing enough that the authorities almost believed her. At first, but I knew better now, she'd planned this for months, maybe longer. She lied to everyone, including her own family, who still thought she was dead. It was sickening to think about how she'd manipulated everyone around her, including me. I also uncovered that she'd been secretly wiring money to herself from the borrowed funds, money she'd told Charles she'd pay back once she sold the house. But she never intended to sell it. Instead, she was planning to disappear forever with a huge chunk of stolen money. She'd even bought a fake passport and some travel documents, ready to vanish. It was like she was preparing for a new life, one where she could finally be free from the mess she created. The emotional toll was overwhelming. I'd gone from feeling betrayed and angry to feeling numb and hopeless. I kept thinking about all the years I'd spent with her, how I'd trusted her, how I'd loved her. And now, it all felt like a lie. I wondered how I'd ever recover from this, how I'd rebuild my life after someone I loved so much turned out to be a con artist and a criminal. I'd never felt so betrayed in my life. It was as if she'd stolen everything, my trust, my future, the house we never even truly owned, and now my peace of mind. Despite everything, I refused to give up. I was determined to bring her back, to hold her accountable, and to reclaim what was mine. The police were closing in on her, and I knew that, sooner or later, she'd have to face the consequences of her actions. But more than anything, I wanted her to realize the damage she'd done, not just to me, but to everyone she'd lied to and betrayed. I wasn't sure if I'd ever forgive her, but I knew I'd fight for justice. And in the back of my mind, I kept telling myself that someday, somehow, this nightmare would end. The days turned into weeks, and each one felt heavier than the last. I was living in a constant state of limbo, waiting for something to break, waiting for her to slip up, for the authorities to catch her, for some clarity. Every morning I woke up with a pounding heart, knowing that the woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with was now a stranger, a criminal, hiding out miles away with stolen money and a fake identity. It was surreal, like I was watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. Meanwhile, I was still battling the court system over the property. The evidence I had gathered was mounting, and I was pushing hard to prove that I was the rightful owner of the house, despite her faking her death and claiming it all. The legal process was dragging, but I refused to back down. I hired a top-notch attorney, someone who specialized in fraud and property disputes, and we worked tirelessly to gather every piece of evidence. Every document, every email, every bank statement pointed to her elaborate scheme. It was frustrating how she'd been so clever, faking her death, using fake documents, hiding her tracks, making it seem like she just vanished into thin air. Then one day, I got a call from the investigator. They tracked her to a small apartment in a city I'd never been to before. She was working at a diner, pretending to be someone else. Seeing her in that photo, working behind the counter, exhausted but still with that smug look, it hit me hard. I felt an overwhelming mix of anger and sadness. How could she be so cold, so detached? She left me, abandoned everything we had, all for greed. And now she was just living a fake life as if she had no remorse. I kept replaying the moment in my head, feeling helpless and furious all at once. Her voice suddenly came through my phone one evening, her tone even more detached than I'd expected. She told me she was living her best life, that she'd moved on and that I should do the same. The audacity. She denied everything, of course. Claimed she was innocent, that I was just jealous or paranoid. But I knew better. I knew she was lying, hiding, plotting her next move. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she'd hurt me, but I didn't. I just told her to stay safe, knowing full well she was probably laughing at me behind her fake smile. The emotional toll was taking its toll. I felt like I was drowning in betrayal. I kept asking myself, how did I miss all the signs? How did I not see this coming? I'd loved her, trusted her, and she'd turned out to be a master manipulator. That realization cut deeper than anything else. It was like I'd been living in a carefully constructed illusion, and now that it was shattered, I was left picking up the pieces. The usual feelings of anger and heartbreak battled inside me, but beneath that, there was a strange sense of emptiness. I'd lost my wife, my partner, my future, all because she'd chosen greed over everything. I kept thinking about the money she borrowed from her boss, Charles. The more I learned, the angrier I became. She convinced him she needed the cash for urgent family issues, but in reality she was planning her escape. She promised to pay him back once she sold the house, but never intended to. Instead, she'd bought a new identity, wired herself money, and was ready to disappear forever. I found out she'd even bought a fake passport and some travel documents, everything prepared for her big escape. That's when I realized how meticulously she'd planned this. She'd been thinking about this for months, maybe longer. The most painful part was realizing how much she'd lied about her motives. She'd always been the bitchy, manipulative type, but I never thought she'd go this far. Faking her death, stealing money, leaving me to pick up the pieces. It was beyond anything I could have imagined. I kept asking myself, how did I not see it coming? How could I have been so blind? The betrayal cut so deep, I felt like I was bleeding inside. I was angry at her, furious at myself, and just exhausted from the emotional roller coaster. Despite everything, I refused to give up. I was determined to bring her back, to hold her accountable, and to reclaim what was mine. The police were closing in on her, and I knew that, sooner or later, she'd have to face the consequences of her actions. But more than anything, I wanted her to realize the damage she'd done. Not just to me, but to everyone she'd lied to and betrayed. I wasn't sure if I'd ever forgive her, but I knew I'd fight for justice. And in the back of my mind, I kept telling myself that someday, somehow, this nightmare would end. The final pieces of the puzzle started falling into place about a month ago. The authorities caught Lisa trying to cross the border with a fake passport, carrying a small bag with some cash, a new ID, and a one-way ticket to a country she'd never even mentioned before. Seeing her in handcuffs, looking defeated but still defiant, was a strange relief, like justice was finally catching up with her. But it didn't erase the pain or the betrayal. All it did was make everything feel a little more real, a little more final. The court proceedings over the house are still ongoing, but I've managed to get a court order to freeze her accounts and seize the assets she'd hidden. The legal system is slow, but I have faith that I'll get some part of my life back, even if it's just the house and some of the money she stole. The thing I never expected was how much I'd learn about myself during this nightmare. I discovered a strength I didn't know I had, standing up for myself, fighting for what's right, and realizing that I don't need someone like her in my life to be happy. Looking back, I see how she played me from the start. The lies, the deception, the fake death, they were just her way of covering her tracks, of trying to escape the consequences of her greed. But her actions caught up with her, and I hope she faces the full weight of everything she's done. I want her to understand that karma isn't always immediate, but it's relentless. And I'm finally starting to believe that I can rebuild my life, piece by piece, without the weight of her betrayal dragging me down. As for me, I've started therapy. I need to work through the anger, the sadness, and the trust issues she's left behind. I've also realized that I need to focus on myself now, on healing and moving forward. I've lost a lot, but I also gained clarity. I won't ever let someone manipulate me like that again. I won't ignore the warning signs, and I'll never again ignore my own instincts. The house, the money, the fake death, they all symbolize how deep her lies went. But I've learned that sometimes the biggest betrayal can be a blessing in disguise. It forced me to wake up to see what truly matters. I want to thank those who supported me through this, friends, family, even the police, because I couldn't have done it alone. Their help reminded me that I'm not alone and that eventually the truth comes out. Now I'm focusing on rebuilding what I lost, my trust, my sense of security, my future. It's not easy, and I know the scars will stay with me, but I refuse to let her define my life anymore. I've learned the hard way that some people are masters of deception, but I've also learned that I'm stronger than I thought. No matter what happens next, I'll keep moving forward, wiser and more cautious, but determined to find happiness again. Because in the end, all I want is peace, something I won't get from her but I'll find within myself.